Japan, a country known for its safety, discipline, and peaceful streets, where violent crime is rare and people trust the system that protects them. But when a crime happens here, it shakes the entire nation and often the world. Because in Japan, crimes feel different. The details are terrifying. The killers are cold. From a deadly gas attack beneath Tokyo's subway to murderers driven by obsession and fame, these are 5 cases that changed Japan forever. This is Top 5 Japanese Crimes that Shocked the World.
Hello, and welcome back to Dark Crimes Real.
March 20th, 1995. Tokyo's morning rush hour. The city was moving with its usual precision. Silent escalators, crowded platforms, trains arriving within seconds of schedule. At 8 a.m., several men carrying plastic bags boarded 5 different subway lines that connected through Kasamigaseki Station, a key stop under Japan's government district. The men placed their bags on the floor, pressed the bundles with their umbrellas, and stepped off the trains. Moments later, the smell of burning rubber and vinegar filled the air. Passengers began to cough, stumble, and fall to the ground. Their vision blurred, their muscles froze. Within minutes, people lay motionless across the train cars. No one understood what was happening. Station workers tried to help, but many collapsed themselves. Calls to emergency services flooded in. Paramedics rushed underground without protective gear, unaware that the air itself was poisoned. As trains continued toward the center of Tokyo, the gas spread through tunnels, platforms, and ventilation systems. By 8:15, chaos had reached multiple stations. Passengers clawed at closed doors, their eyes streaming, their lungs burning. In some stations, bodies were stocked by exits as rescuers carried out the unconscious. Above ground, sirens echoed across Tokyo. Japan in the early 1990s was a country that trusted order. Terrorism was something that happened abroad. The idea of a chemical weapon released on public transport was beyond imagination. Yet beneath that order, a cult called Om Shinrikyo had been preparing for years. Om began in the 1980s as a yoga and meditation group founded by Shoko Asahara, a partially blind man who declared himself the reincarnation of Buddha. He preached the coming of Armageddon, a war between Japan and the Western world that would destroy humanity. He told followers that only Om members would survive and rule the new world. By 1995, the cult had tens of thousands of members, including doctors, engineers, and chemists. Inside secret facilities in rural Japan, Om manufactured weapons, automatic rifles, and toxic chemicals. They tested sarin on animals, and possibly on people kidnapped from the streets. For Asahara, the subway was a symbol of Japan's modern life, controlled, efficient, and full of the ordinary citizens he wanted to shock. His plan was simple: release sarin gas during rush hour to trigger national panic, weaken the government, and prove his prophecy of destruction. The nerve agent he chose, sarin, is one of the most deadly chemicals ever made. It attacks the nervous system, paralyzing the lungs and heart. A few milliliters can kill within minutes. On that morning, 5 cult members carried sarin wrapped in newspaper, each targeting a different line converging on Tokyo's political center. At precisely 7:48 a.m., they pierced the bags and exited the trains. Inside the tunnels, the gas began to spread silently. Passengers slumped against windows. Some screamed for air. Others clawed at their throats. Train operators tried to move the cars to open areas but could not see through the fogged windows. At one station, a man tried to kick a bag off the train, unaware that his shoes were melting from the liquid. Emergency staff poured into the subway, dragging victims upstairs. Ambulances lined the streets, transporting hundreds of people who couldn't breathe. Hospitals were quickly overwhelmed. Many doctors did not recognize sarin poisoning. Staff treated patients without masks, exposing themselves. At St. Luke's International Hospital, more than 600 victims arrived within hours. Nurses collapsed while working. The chief doctor later said he thought Tokyo was under attack from a foreign army. By the end of the day, 13 people were dead, and more than 6,000 had suffered injuries, some permanently blinded or paralyzed. The images of rescue workers in gas masks and victims lying on sidewalks shocked the entire country. Japan, a city known for control, had been brought to a standstill by an invisible enemy. The investigation moved fast. Police suspected Aum Shinrikyo within days. 2 months earlier, the cult had been linked to another sarin attack in Matsumoto, Nagano Prefecture, where 8 people died. The evidence fit too closely. Raids were launched on Aum compounds across Japan. Officers discovered chemical labs, stockpiles of sarin ingredients, biological cultures, and a working helicopter that the cult planned to use for aerial attacks. They also found documents describing experiments on living subjects and plans to produce VX gas, anthrax, and even nuclear materials. Inside Aum's headquarters near Mount Fuji, police found rooms filled with cash, weapons, and surveillance systems. Shoko Asahara was discovered hiding in a small space under a ceiling panel, meditating as officers broke in. More than 150 cult members were arrested. Trials lasted for years. Asahara and 12 senior members were sentenced to death. Others received long prison terms. The Japanese public followed every detail. For many, it was the first time they had seen evil committed in such an organized, methodical way. When the executions were finally carried out in 2018, more than 2 decades after the attack, many survivors said they felt no closure, only exhaustion. The Tokyo subway sarin attack remains the worst act of domestic terrorism in Japan's history. It destroyed the illusion that Japan was immune to mass violence. The event changed how police handled terrorism, how hospitals prepared for chemical exposure, and how the government monitored religious organizations. The country's sense of safety was gone overnight. For a society built on trust and order, the idea that ordinary citizens could be murdered by fellow Japanese using weapons of war was unthinkable. The attack revealed something deeper, that even in the most disciplined nation, faith can become fanaticism, and order can hide chaos. Japan had seen terror from a group, but soon it would meet terror from a single man, a killer born from obsession. Between 1988 and 1989, Japan faced a nightmare it had never known. 4 young girls disappeared from quiet neighborhoods near Tokyo. Their names were small in the news at first, just missing person notices pinned to police boards. No one imagined the cases were connected. No one imagined one man was hunting children. Tsutomu Miyazaki lived with his parents in the city of Iidabashi. He was 26, quiet, thin, and socially withdrawn. He had a congenital deformity in his hands that made him shy and isolated from childhood. He spent most of his time reading comics, watching horror videos, and collecting photographs. Neighbors called him polite but strange. He rarely spoke. At work, he was invisible. In August 1988, a 4-year-old girl named Mari Kono vanished while playing outside her home. Police searched rivers and fields. Her bicycle was found near a wooded area, but there was no trace of her. Weeks later, her family received a phone call. A man breathing heavily, saying only the child's name before hanging up. More calls followed. Some nights, an envelope arrived at their home containing ashes and small bones. Tests later confirmed they belonged to Mari. The case horrified the nation, but there were no suspects. 3 months later, another girl disappeared, then another. Each case followed the same pattern: abduction in daylight, no witnesses, and taunting messages sent to families. The media began calling the unknown suspect the little girl murderer. Fear spread across Tokyo's suburbs. Parents stopped letting children walk to school alone. Police increased patrols but had no leads. Miyazaki blended easily into the crowd. He drove a small car, carried a camera, and roamed residential streets looking for targets. He used his charmless appearance to disarm suspicion. Later, investigators would find that he kept detailed notes of every abduction. He filmed himself with the victims. He stored parts of their remains in his home, labeling each with dates. In July 1989, his final crime exposed him. He tried to approach 2 sisters playing near a riverbank in Hachioji. When one girl screamed, her father chased the man's car and noted the license plate. Police traced it to Tsutomu Miyazaki. When officers entered his small apartment, they expected to find a quiet young man with no history of violence. What they found instead was a room filled with horror. Thousands of videotapes lined the walls: anime, pornography, and news footage of the girls' funerals. There were photographs of the victims, bones kept in boxes, and a diary describing what he had done. He confessed immediately, speaking calmly, without emotion. He told investigators that he acted on impulses he couldn't control. He said he wanted to preserve the moment of death. The details of the crimes were so disturbing that parts of his confession were never released to the public. Psychiatrists debated whether he was insane. One doctor called him a textbook psychopath. Another said he was a man consumed by isolation and fantasy, a product of Japan's growing otaku subculture, young men retreating from reality into media and obsession. That phrase, the otaku killer, became his label in every newspaper headline. Public anger grew quickly. Parents demanded accountability. Why had police taken so long? Why were these families left unprotected? Officers eventually held a press conference to apologize for their failures, an unprecedented act in Japanese law enforcement. The media broadcast the story non-stop. Commentators called it the darkest case since World War II. The trial began in 1990 and lasted almost 2 decades. Miyazaki showed little emotion. He drew himself in court as cartoons. He blamed an alternate personality for the killings. Prosecutors argued he was fully aware of his actions and had planned every detail. In 1997, the court found him guilty of 4 murders, kidnapping, and mutilation. He was sentenced to death. His appeals dragged on for years, but none succeeded. On June 17, 2008, Tsutomu Miyazaki was executed by hanging at the Tokyo Detention Center. The case left deep scars. It changed how Japan viewed isolation, mental illness, and the influence of violent media. For the first time, the word otaku, once meaning a simple hobbyist, became associated with social danger. Parents began watching what their children consumed. Police created new systems for tracking missing children and sharing information between prefectures. Television networks avoided showing crime scenes involving minors for months after the execution. For many Japanese, the most haunting part was not what Miyazaki did, but how normal he seemed. He lived in a family home. He worked quietly. He passed people every day on the street. He was invisible until it was too late. Decades later, survivors and investigators still describe a lingering unease that someone like him could exist undetected in a society built on order. Miyazaki's crimes were not only about murder. They forced Japan to see the loneliness inside its own modern life, the emptiness hidden behind closed doors. The country had seen terror from a cult that poisoned its subway. Now it had witnessed evil created by isolation. But the next story would reveal something even harder to accept: a man who killed abroad and became famous for it. In 1981, a Japanese student studying in Paris committed one of the most disturbing crimes of the century. His name was Issei Sagawa. He was small, quiet, polite, and born into wealth. No one imagined he would become a killer remembered across the world. Sagawa was born in Kobe, Japan in 1949. His family owned a successful business. He grew up surrounded by comfort, educated, and fluent in several languages. But from childhood, he was haunted by violent fantasies. He said he dreamed of eating human flesh. He never told anyone. He finished university in Tokyo, then moved to France for graduate studies in literature at the Sorbonne in 1977. In Paris, he appeared shy and intelligent. He attended poetry readings, art exhibitions, and academic parties. He lived alone in a small apartment filled with books and drawings, but his obsession grew stronger. He began inviting women to dinner, always foreign, always tall, the type he said he envied. He told psychiatrists later that he saw himself as weak and small, and that by consuming someone beautiful, he could become part of them. On June 11, 1981, Sagawa invited a Dutch classmate, Renee Hartvelt, to his apartment. She was 25, kind, and fluent in French and Japanese. He asked her to help him translate poetry. When she arrived, she sat at a small desk reading verses aloud. He stood behind her with a rifle. Without warning, he pulled the trigger. Renee died instantly. He said later that at that moment, his lifelong fantasy had become real. For 2 days, he remained in the apartment with the body. He photographed what he had done, wrote in his journal, and described the experience as an expression of love. He stored parts of the body in his refrigerator and ate small pieces of flesh. Then, late at night, he packed the remains into 2 suitcases and called a taxi. The driver noticed blood seeping through the bags. Sagawa told him they contained books. He was dropped near the Bois de Boulogne park, where he tried to dump the suitcases into a lake. Passers-by saw him struggling and called the police. When officers opened the bags, they found human remains. They returned to Sagawa's apartment and arrested him. Inside, they discovered photographs, written notes, and traces of what he had eaten. Sagawa confessed immediately. He told police that he had no remorse, that he had been preparing for this moment for years. He said, "I wanted her to stay with me forever." The French court ordered psychiatric evaluation. Doctors concluded he was mentally unfit for trial and diagnosed him as insane. Instead of prison, he was sent to a mental hospital in Paris. He spent just 4 years there before the French authorities decided to deport him to Japan. In Japan, Sagawa was placed briefly in a psychiatric ward in Tokyo. Doctors there declared him sane and no longer dangerous. Because the French court had already dropped charges under insanity, Japan had no legal ground to retry him. He was released in 1986. He had killed and eaten a woman, and now he was free. The reaction was immediate. The Japanese public was horrified, but also fascinated. Television shows invited him for interviews. Publishers offered book deals. He wrote articles about art, crime, and food. He even appeared in a few documentaries, speaking calmly about the killing. Some described him as intelligent, others as a symbol of Japan's growing obsession with infamy. For many years, He lived in Tokyo as a strange kind of celebrity, a man who had turned murder into publicity. Critics accused the media of exploiting a killer for entertainment. They called it the cannibal phenomenon. Psychologists said it showed how fame could distort morality, how the public's curiosity could erase empathy for the victim. René's family, still in the Netherlands, refused interviews. They said the attention given to Sagawa felt like a second crime. Over time, his life became a portrait of decline. He struggled with money and poor health. He published several books, one of them titled In the Fog, describing his version of the events. In interviews, he often said he regretted nothing. Later, he said he was lonely and wanted to die. He was occasionally seen walking with a cane, living off disability benefits. Despite the outrage, he continued to attract attention from journalists and filmmakers. For decades, he remained a living reminder of how far fame and fascination could go. Issei Sagawa died in November 2022 at the age of 73 from pneumonia. He died a free man. He was never punished by law for the murder of René Hartvelt. In Japan, his death revived debate about mental illness, justice, and the power of media to turn criminals into icons. The case of Issei Sagawa remains one of the most unsettling in modern history. It blurred the line between madness and manipulation, between guilt and celebrity. He once said that his biggest surprise was not that he killed, but that the world wanted to listen to him after he did. For Japan, his story was a mirror, showing what happens when fascination replaces fear and when curiosity erases conscience. The nation had seen terror in its subways and horror born from loneliness. Now it had witnessed a killer celebrated for his crime. But in the years ahead, Japan would face a new kind of murderer, one who used not a weapon, but the internet. In 2017, Japan faced a crime that reflected a new kind of darkness, one born from social media, loneliness, and despair. It became known as the case of the Twitter killer. Takahiro Shiraishi lived in Zama, a quiet city south of Tokyo. He was 27, unemployed, and nearly invisible to those around him. To neighbors, he was polite but distant. Online, he created a different life. On Twitter, he searched for people who wanted to die. He posted messages like, "If you're suffering and can't go on, let's die together." For those lost in silence, he seemed to understand. For 9 people, he became the last person they would ever meet. In the summer of 2017, Shiraishi began sending private messages to strangers. Most were young women struggling with depression or isolation. He told them he could help them end their lives peacefully. He promised to die with them. When they agreed to meet, he invited them to his small apartment near the train station. No one ever came back out. The disappearances began quietly. In August, families reported missing daughters who had last been active on Twitter. By October, 9 people were gone. Police traced the online activity of one missing woman, a 23-year-old, who had tweeted about wanting to die. She had arranged to meet a man using the handle @HangingPro. Officers tracked the account to Takahiro Shiraishi's address in Zama. On October 30th, 2017, police entered his apartment. What they found inside stunned the country. Coolers and storage boxes lined the walls. Inside them were body parts, skulls, bones, and flesh. 9 victims in total, 8 women and 1 man. Shiraishi was calm as he spoke to the officers. He said, "Yes, they're here. I killed them." He showed no emotion, no sign of panic. Investigators spent days cataloging evidence. They found saws, ropes, and tools used to dismember the victims. They also found Twitter messages that connected him directly to each one. He admitted that he had met every victim through social media. He said they all expressed a wish to die, but that he killed them for personal satisfaction, not mercy. He told detectives, "I didn't think it was wrong, I just didn't want to be lonely." The discovery shocked Japan. The media called it one of the worst serial murders in modern times. It was hard to understand how 9 people could vanish through social media without notice. Experts pointed to the country's growing crisis of isolation and suicide. More than 20,000 people took their own lives in Japan that year. Shiraishi had turned that despair into a hunting ground. Neighbors said the building always smelled strange, but they assumed it was trash. One resident said she heard a saw late at night. No one reported it. Police later admitted they had no reason to suspect him earlier. He had no record and no signs of violence. He was simply another quiet man in a quiet city. When the case went to court in 2020, Japan watched closely. Shiraishi appeared calm, dressed in a gray suit. He admitted everything. He said he never forced his victims, but manipulated them into coming. He said he killed them immediately after they entered his room. His defense lawyers argued that because the victims had expressed suicidal intent, he should not receive the death penalty. Prosecutors rejected that claim. They said he exploited vulnerable people for his own pleasure. The judge agreed. On December 15, 2020, Shiraishi was sentenced to death. The ruling described him as fully aware and fully responsible. When the verdict was read, he bowed slightly and said nothing. No appeal was filed. The Zama murders left Japan stunned and afraid. The country that prided itself on safety was forced to confront how easily predators could hide behind screens. After the case, lawmakers moved to tighten rules on social media, requiring faster cooperation with police in missing person investigations. Twitter, the platform he used, updated its policy on suicide-related content, promising to remove accounts promoting self-harm. But the larger problem remained. Japan's suicide rate was still among the highest in the developed world. Mental health support was limited, and loneliness remained widespread. The case became a symbol of a society where connection existed only online, and where even a cry for help could lead to death. Reporters later interviewed people who had exchanged messages with Shiraishi, but survived. One woman said he told her, "You don't have to die alone." She said his words felt comforting until she saw his face on the news. She realized he never intended to die with anyone. He only wanted control. When the death sentence was announced, public reaction was mixed. Some demanded it immediately. Others questioned what had created a man like him. Psychologists described him as manipulative, but not insane. They said he represented a new kind of killer, one made possible by technology and despair. Years later, the apartment building in Zama still stands. Residents say it's quiet again, but some refuse to live in the unit where the murders happened. They call it the Room of Silence. The Twitter killer case remains one of the most haunting reminders of Japan's social isolation. It showed how easily technology could connect strangers and how quickly that connection could turn deadly. In a country that values order and restraint, his crimes felt unthinkable. They were precise, planned, and emotionless. From religious terror to personal obsession, Japan had seen many forms of evil. But the next tragedy would not come from faith or loneliness. It would come from anger, and it would burn an entire building to ashes. On the morning of July 18, 2019, smoke rose over the city of Kyoto. It came from a 3-story studio building belonging to Kyoto Animation, one of Japan's most beloved anime companies. Inside were more than 70 employees. Within minutes, the building was engulfed in flames. 36 people would never make it out. Kyoto Animation, known as KyoAni, was famous for series such as K-On!, Violet Evergarden, and A Silent Voice. Its style was gentle, emotional, and hopeful, a reflection of the Japan many wanted to believe in. Fans around the world admired the studio for nurturing young artists and treating employees fairly in an industry often criticized for exploitation. It was a place associated with dreams, not death. At 10:30 a.m., a man walked into the studio carrying 2 large containers filled with gasoline. He was Shinji Aoba, 41 years old, unemployed, and deeply angry. Witnesses later said he shouted, "They stole my story," before pouring gasoline across the entrance and lighting it. The explosion was immediate. Fire raced up the staircase, the only path to escape. Within seconds, thick black smoke filled the building. Those on the upper floors were trapped. Some tried to reach the roof, but the door was locked. Others broke windows, calling for help. Most never made it out. Nearby residents heard the blast and saw people crawling out, their clothes burned. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but by then the blaze had consumed nearly everything. It took more than 5 hours to control. When it was over, 36 employees were dead and more than 30 others injured. It was the worst mass killing in Japan since the end of World War II. The suspect, Aoba, was found lying on the street nearby, badly burned. He was arrested on the spot and later hospitalized for almost a year before being fit to stand trial. He told police that Kyoto Animation had stolen a novel idea he had submitted to one of their contests. Investigators later confirmed that while he had sent a script, it bore no resemblance to any KyoAni work. His claim was a delusion fueled by resentment and mental instability. The victims included some of Japan's most talented young animators, directors, and writers. Many had helped create internationally acclaimed films. Some were only in their 20s, just starting their careers. The studio lost irreplaceable artwork, computers, and storyboards, years of creative work destroyed in minutes. For Japan, a country where major crimes are rare, the shock was immediate and overwhelming. National television broadcast the fire live. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe called it heartbreaking. Fans around the world expressed grief. In the days after, thousands visited the site to leave flowers and letters. Donations poured in from more than 60 countries. Over $30 million were raised to support the victims' families. Police later revealed that Aoba had traveled from Saitama to Kyoto by train, buying gasoline from a local station the night before. He carried knives and a hammer, suggesting he had planned to attack anyone who tried to stop him. Surveillance footage showed him pacing outside the studio before entering. He had no connection to Kyoto Animation and no evidence that anyone there even knew his name. The investigation concluded that his motive was built on paranoia, a belief that others were conspiring against him. Psychiatrists confirmed that he suffered from delusional disorder but was aware of his actions. The court ruled that his planning and preparation proved intent. In December 2023, the Kyoto District Court found Shinji Aoba guilty of murder and arson. He was sentenced to death. The judge described the attack as an assault on human life, culture, and creativity. Aoba reportedly showed little reaction when the verdict was read. He remains on death row. The impact of the tragedy reached far beyond Japan's borders. Kyoto Animation was not just a studio, it was a symbol of artistic care and optimism. After the fire, the company vowed to rebuild. Survivors returned to work months later in temporary offices, quietly resuming projects left unfinished. When Violet Evergarden the movie premiered in 2020, audiences saw it not only as an anime film, but as a memorial to those lost. The film's final credits carried a simple message: Thank you for your support. The attack forced Japan to confront another painful reality. Unlike previous crimes driven by ideology or isolation, this one came from anger, a single man's resentment against the world. It showed how fragile safety could be, even in a country where kindness and discipline define daily life. The images of burned sketchbooks, melted pencils, and rows of flowers outside the studio became a symbol of collective mourning. The event remains one of the darkest days in modern Japanese history. In Kyoto, the site of the fire has been cleared. Plans for a memorial are underway. Survivors still struggle with trauma. Many said that rebuilding was not only about restoring the studio, but about honoring the idea that creativity itself should never be silenced. The Kyoto animation arson attack revealed something deeper than violence. It revealed grief shared across nations. From strangers online to fans who grew up with their stories, millions felt the same shock, that a place built for beauty could be destroyed by one man's anger. From cult terror to serial killers, to crimes of obsession and despair, Japan's story of violence spans decades. Each tragedy carries a different face, but all share one truth. Even in the calmest society, darkness can appear without warning. Japan is a country known for order, safety, and respect, a place where violence feels rare, almost impossible. But these stories prove that even here, darkness can take many forms. A cult that turned faith into terror. A man who killed children to satisfy obsession. A murderer who walked free after cannibalism. A predator who used social media to hunt the lonely. And an arsonist who destroyed a house of art. Each crime different, each one unforgettable. Together, they shattered the idea that Japan stood apart from the rest of the world. Behind every quiet street and shining skyline, there are memories that will not fade, victims whose names became warnings, and cities that learned how fragile peace can be. For Japan, these tragedies were not only about death, they were about reflection, about what safety means and how easily it can vanish. Evil does not belong to one country, one culture, or one time. It hides anywhere people stop looking for it. Top 5 Japanese crimes that shocked the world. Stories that remind us silence is never the same once it's been broken. This is Dark Crimes Real.